The views and opinions of the following show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of News Talk 1450 WOL, Radio 1 Incorporated, or their management.
Welcome to Beyond Just Talk. This is a positive, inspirational, and thought-provoking program that discusses life and business topics from a solution-oriented perspective with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, welcome. It's another great day, and we're ready to discuss subjects that will make a difference in your day. This is the place that people connect, ideas are shared, and lives are enriched. My name is Stacey Young. My author's name is S.L. Young, but please call me Sly. Before we get started today, next week, my guest is a man who has had an interesting journey that led to a temporary timeout, but he uses these experiences to help individuals, including himself, to do and be better through his work at an up-and-coming nonprofit organization. For this week, we'll have a recap of last week's show, have a conversation with my guest, Dr. Robert W. Simmons III, who is the Chief of Innovation and Research at the District of Columbia Public Schools, and we'll preview next week's guest. On last week's show, I provided information on my latest book, Turning Darkness into Light, Inspiring Lessons After a Near Suicide, which is available for sale on my website and Amazon.com. My featured guest last week was Jasmine Stringer, who has a lifestyle brand, Carpe Diem with Jasmine. Mrs. Stringer is an authority in business development, customer relationship management, and a social media influencer. Her tagline, Carpe Diem, represents her belief that everyone should seize the day, every day. For individuals to live fulfilled lives, they must possess a certain level of belief, persistence, resilience, and also not be afraid to make tough choices to live life on purpose. As a social media influencer, Ms. Stringer helps to promote companies' products and services. The goal of a social media influencer is to create business opportunities, engage audiences, maximize media placements, and build strong brand awareness. Mrs. Stringer shared that anyone who has an extensive social media presence can become a social media influencer. However, it takes commitment, the ability to understand branding, monitoring trends, and excellent communication skills to be successful. Mrs. Stringer's goals with her company are to help individuals and organizations maximize strategic reach and market potential. If you'd like to contact Mrs. Stringer or learn more about her company, Carpe Diem with Jasmine, visit her website at carpediemwithjasmine.com. If you missed our conversation, you can listen to it on my website at slyoung.com/bjt-radio.html. Also, my interviews from July 28th are now posted with my featured guest, Sharon Tyndall, about Underground Railroad quilt codes, and special guest, Stephen A. Johnson of Bright Minds Tutoring, who discussed the importance of getting assistance for any type of student. At this point, I want to take a moment to acknowledge today as the first anniversary of Robin Williams' death by suicide. It's because of his personal sacrifice and an insensitive comment on Facebook, which questioned the reasons that he took his life, that I became a very vocal proponent about mental health awareness. In honor of his tragic loss, I wrote a new article, Journey After a Near Suicide, to educate, remove stigmas, and save lives, which summarizes my writing journey over the last year, and is my planned last article that I will write about depression and suicide. This article is available on my website for advance review at slyoung.com/depression-journey.html. Mr. Williams, quote, "I used to think the worst thing in life is to end up all alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel alone." I understand this quote clearly as someone who has battled depression. It's a gift and a blessing to have individuals choose to be in your life. If you haven't told someone you care about, that you love, appreciate, and wish the best for them, please do so today, because once they're gone, trust me, you don't want to be thinking, I wish I would have told them I love you. If you or anyone you know needs assistance, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or suicidepreventionlifeline.org. If you'd like to review my collection of materials that addresses depression on many different levels, including the article referenced today, this information is available at slyoung.com/depression.html. If you'd like to connect with me after the show, you can reach me on my website at slyoung.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/beyondjusttalk, or locate me on Twitter, Google+, Instagram, and SoundCloud using the handle SLYoungVA. As for the rest of today's show, we'll discuss the journey my guest took to become a well-respected teacher, administrator, and mentor, learn about ways to overcome challenges to achieve success, discuss ways to help at-risk individuals and communities, and detail ways for individuals to get re-engaged to obtain a high school diploma or GED. Before I introduce today's guest, I want listeners to know that if you'd like to join our conversation, please dial 1-800-450-7876. My guest today, Dr. Robert W. Simmons III, is the Chief of Innovation and Research at the District of Columbia Public Schools, DCPS. Dr. Simmons is a former middle school science teacher and administrator. As a highly respected educator, he was recognized with a couple of nominations for the Walt Disney National Teacher of the Year and one for the Whitney and Elizabeth Macmillan Foundation Outstanding Educator Award. He's a member of the nationally recognized Social Justice Collaborative, which provides professional development and also models a commitment to move beyond just celebrating urban achievement. Dr. Simmons was part of a team of educators who started a science, technology, engineering, and math STEM-focused middle school program for boys, a board member of one of a few public Montessori schools in an urban community, and the founder of a mentoring program for African-American boys. He is the author of over 30 publications, including articles in the Village Celebration, and he co-edited the book, Talking About Race, Alleviating the Fear. Dr. Simmons' next book, Interrupting the School-to-Prison Pipeline, African American Males as Critical Scholars and Intellectuals, is under development. It's part autobiographical, but also offers reflections about the impact of incarcerated fathers on their sons. Now, without further ado, I welcome my guest who is a sought-after motivational speaker, teacher, urban educator, researcher, innovator in education, and an excellent role model, Dr. Robert W. Simmons III. Welcome to Beyond Just Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming in, and I'm glad to have you in today. So one of the things I always like to do is to start with a little bit about the person who's on my show so my audience can become a little bit more comfortable. So who is Dr. Simmons?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a father, and so that's the most important role for me in life. I am a urban educator, lifelong urban educator. I'm a Detroiter at heart, and I'm in D.C., love D.C., but I have the 313 running through my blood, my soul. I am a mentor, a friend. I am a committed educator. I've been in education for almost 20 years.
Okay, well, that's great. It sounds like you've had a lot of experiences, and a lot of us have a special place in our heart for somewhere that we used to live when we were young. So you had some challenging experiences living in Detroit during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic.
Sure.
Did this environment impact your success at school?
I think that it both positively and negatively influenced me in school. I think the positive is that I knew I didn't want to be like my father, who had a Morehouse degree but also spent the majority of my life in prison. But I also knew that I wanted to spend enough time in schools understanding that education was the ticket out of the conditions that I grew up in terms of my neighborhood. I was raised by my mother and my grandmother in a loving house, but my mother and grandmother had to make some tough decisions financially in order for them to provide access to athletic opportunities and other opportunities for me. And so it was a challenging neighborhood wrought with drugs, violence. I had to take the public bus to school. So, I carried, I'll never forget the day that I bought a knife to carry in my backpack to take the bus to school.
Wow.
To feel like I had a sense of protection. Fortunately, I never had to use it. But the fact that, in some ways I was struggling with that as well.
Right. And then, so how did you make the connection, and around what age did you make the connection that education was the ticket for a better life?
I was probably 16, and I got kicked off of the football team my sophomore year of high school. They kicked me out of French because I was doing so poorly. I had a 1.8 GPA. I just hated school. A lot of it was related to dealing with the emotional incarceration I experienced when my father was physically incarcerated. And so I had to make a choice. And, taking the one thing that mattered most to me, which was sports, I knew I had to make a change. I had been playing sports since I was 8 years old. So that was the first time I'd ever been told no, that you can't play sports. And so that motivated me to think more deeply about what I wanted in life. And the only thing I ever wanted to do was be a teacher. Like, that's all I wanted to do from that moment on.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because we sort of have similar journeys because I had some challenges earlier in my life in high school where I almost left high school because I was directed to leave, and hearing that about your 1.8 GPA. And that's not unlike many folks that I've actually have known who have struggled, and then they figured out somewhere around that age of 16 how to turn things around.
Yep.
So What was it that happened while you were in school? Did anybody try to help you? Did you have any assistance? Did you run with the wrong crowd? What was going on?
It was a little bit of both. I had my friends in my neighborhood, but I also went to a Jesuit high school. And I was one of the few kids from the city who went to this school. And they had a program that recruited young people from the city of Detroit who couldn't necessarily afford full tuition. They provided some scholarships. And, I always tell folks that while I didn't necessarily want to go to this school. I mean, my mother put foot on neck and said, look here, this is what's going to happen. And going to this elite Jesuit high school probably saved my life because I started to see other things. But I'll admit, I was hesitant at first because I had never gone to school with white folks. I didn't know African Americans in Detroit had money like that. I didn't know because I grew up probably about a quarter mile from where the social uprising happened in 67, 68. So like that was what I knew. And as a matter of fact, that my neighborhood was in the news the other day because there was a national story about a shooting at a 300 or 400 person birthday party. And they killed somebody and then the people wouldn't tell who did it. The father, his daughter or son was killed. So the neighborhood has gotten progressively worse. Several people have said. I still go back to the neighborhood when I'm in Detroit.
Right. And one of the things that you brought up, and I don't think that mothers necessarily get the credit that they necessarily deserve because
mothers and grandmothers.
Exactly, because you just talked about a strong mother, and I had a strong mother as well. And having that influence in my life helped to sort of drive what I did and the man that I became today. And it's sort of interesting because a lot of the work that mothers do, and a lot of folks don't give them credit for this, is in the early years.
That's right.
Because we know when we're in those 14, 15, 16, 17 years, what's the difference between right and wrong?
Right.
And it's about the choices that we make as individuals.
Right, absolutely.
But the other thing that you mentioned that I think is really important is about the environment.
Right.
And the environment matters. So you went from this environment that wasn't so good, and then you went into a new environment, which could have had its own challenges because you were trying to transition.
Yeah.
So why was the environment so important in your success?
I think the environment was important because it provided me, I guess, some structure. And I think that I needed the structure. I was always successful as an athlete because I had structure and coaching. But when I didn't have structure, I was just kind of wilding out. And so I think that my life as a high school student, when I finally accepted structure as being a positive thing, I became much more successful to the point where my junior and senior year, I was able to have a 3.5, 3.6 in my high school. And they say junior year is your toughest year. So my toughest year, I was able to do that. And my high school counselor, even to this day, is always like, dude, like, what happened? Like, you just checked out the first 2 years. So I think that for me, high school, junior year, the light bulb came on. And I realized, another part of it was I realized that I didn't want to end up like my father. I didn't want to have an education and make poor choices either.
Right.
While he had a great education and went to Morehouse, and was deeply involved in the later parts of the civil rights movement to the point where I have a first edition signed copy of Coretta Scott King's autobiography. Like he was that much involved with the movement. So I appreciated the struggle and and it led me to starting the first Black Student Union, being a part of the group of guys that started the Black Student Union. We had a newsletter called the Afrocentric that we had going at the school as well.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to take a break, so we'll pick this up on the other side.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
Good morning. This WOL traffic update is brought to you by Preparation H. Southbound on 295, pretty slow from Burroughs Avenue to East Capitol Street. 14th Street Southeast near Kentucky Avenue, it was a vehicle fire. Minnesota Avenue at Clay Place, south of Benning Road. Look for accident activity there as well, with police still on the scene. Don't stand for hemorrhoids. Get relief with the power of 2 from Preparation H. First, use fast-acting Preparation H medicated wipes, then longer-lasting maximum strength cream. Use as directed. Now your WOL weather forecast brought to you by Dollar Tree. For today, could see some thunderstorms this afternoon, a high near 87. Partly cloudy overnight, could see another storm down to 68. Tomorrow, mostly sunny, a high near 85. Get all your back-to-school basics for less at Dollar Tree, where everything's $1. Stock up on notebooks, binders, pencils, lunchbox snacks, locker accessories, and more. Dollar Tree, where everything's $1. Steve Hirshhorn for News Talk 1450 WOL, where information is power.
The odds of having a boy who grows up loving baseball,
1 in 6.
which earns him a college scholarship,
1 in 2,500.
that gets him a contract in the minors,
1 in 3,700.
which leads to starting shortstop in the majors.
1 in 290,000.
The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism,
1 in 150. You know the odds. Now learn the signs. Go to autismspeaks.org. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back. I'm enjoying my conversation today with Dr. Simmons of the DC Public Schools. So we're talking about, prior to the break, some of our experiences as a young man, specifically Dr. Simmons' experiences. And one of the things that you had mentioned prior to the break was about how the experiences that you witnessed that your father was going through was a powerful motivator to keep you on the straight path. Why was that a positive motivator for you? Because I know some folks that'll have a parent that's in jail and they'll end up following that exact same path. So what was different for you?
I just think I wanted something different. But I also had a mother and grandmother, and my 2 uncles were involved in my life. So they showed me what happens when you were successful in the classroom. And so both of my uncles were great influences. In fact, my son is named after my Uncle John, who passed away of colon cancer. So I have a deep amount of respect for my uncles, not just as role models and mentors, but as husbands, as fathers, as community engaged citizens. My uncle who passed away showed me a pathway to use community engagement and social justice as a tool. He was deeply involved with the Nation of Islam. He was deeply involved with the Shrine of the Black Madonna for quite some time in Detroit. And so I just saw that deep in them, but I also saw the hustle and grind of Detroit through my grandfather, who worked at Ford Motor Company and went to work every day. My grandmother was a cook. She was from Newmarket, Tennessee, and basically was a nanny back in the day, raising white children. And so she taught me a healthy work ethic. And so once I realized I wasn't following through with what she expected on that work ethic piece, it kind of hit you. And, they threatened to kick me out of the school. And so, being on punishment and things like that wasn't going to work for me. So I decided to do something different. But I also want to say, I saw my friends that went to other schools that were in my neighborhood get shot, killed. And so I knew that I didn't want to do that to my mother and my grandmother. So.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because you mentioned that they were going to kick you out of school, and that was sort of interesting. It was my wake-up point also. But unlike you turned around in a year or two. It took me many years in order to turn it around. So that's a powerful lesson, because here's somebody who turned it around immediately with some positive influences based on the environment and the support system. And for me, it took a few more years to turn around. So we don't want to give up on students too soon.
I mean, I wouldn't say I turned it around immediately. I had days where it was a challenge, you know what I mean?
Right.
Just trying to figure out life in general. But I think that, as I always say, life is a journey. And so we all have to continue to commit to grow. And I think that having great mentors involved, which is a huge part of the work that we're doing in DC Public Schools right now with our 500 for 500 mentoring through literacy program led by my team with Burnell Holland and Edgar Novoa. And, we're really building on the life experience, not just my life experience, but everyone's life experience of having a mentor. And so I wouldn't be where I'm at without a mentor. And I have multiple mentors. And so, I always tell folks, being a good mentor isn't race exclusive. And so one of my closest mentors is now the president at Loyola Marymount University. And, and he's a white guy who's a physicist from Princeton. I mean, grew up very different than I did, but is just a good dude, just a good dude.
Yeah, a good role model is a good role model.
Absolutely.
And the other things that I heard you say were that you had that support system, you had role models, but you also used the information that you were getting from your environment from the negative perspective to stay away from that, and from a positive perspective to start to work towards.
Well, I'm not going to say I stayed away from it. I mean, some of it I did get involved in, I just didn't get caught. So I hope my mother's not listening or anything like that. But, I think that at one point, one of my closest friends named Mike, he's a truck driver now. He's done time, but he ran a dope house on our block. And I remember most of the time when I would go down there, he would, whenever something crazy was getting ready to happen, he would put me out. And he just said, something better is going to happen for you in life than this. And probably about maybe a month or so ago, I was back in Detroit and ran into him. And, we had a conversation just sitting on the porch at his mom's house, still in the same neighborhood, just talking about how life is so challenging. And, we had a conversation, or I was having a conversation with him about we should write a book about it. And because I had given him for his birthday one year a copy of The Other Westmore and just said, you need to check this out because there's a story here.
Right.
So,
yeah, and it is a powerful story.
Absolutely.
And then based on your experiences, what advice do you have for parents who are raising children in a similar environment?
I think providing them access to opportunities outside of their community is critical. And it will help broaden their horizons. And so I was fortunate enough where my mother was able to provide me with access to camps, where I also played sports, and our teams were very good. So we got to do some travel baseball. We played football. My senior year of college, I actually took my first trip abroad and went to Peru. And that's when the light bulb continued to brighten for me. And so, again, I think opportunities outside, and in this particular region, there are all sorts of free opportunities. There are opportunities that are reasonably priced. But I also think that as a region, we need to do a better job of providing young folks from challenging economic situations with access to free programs. Everybody shouldn't have to drop $500-$600 a week to go to Sidwell Friends to get a good summer program.
Right.
I mean, it's a great summer program, but I think young folks who are growing up in economically challenging situations deserve those types of opportunities as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned this about the money perspective, because money shouldn't be a limiting factor for anybody to have access to a quality education. Mm-hmm. And we need more programs that provide opportunities to everyone to learn, and not based on money. And, it's a conversation that I would love to have with you some other time. But due to time today, I'm going to continue to move along.
No doubt.
And then, so what can be done to reduce the school-to-prison pipeline? What do you think?
So I think that, it's complicated, right? Like, I think there's a disproportionate number, especially of African-American boys and girls who are suspended. I think the latest data says black boys are suspended 3 times more likely at 3 times the rate of white kids.
And greater severities, too.
Yeah, and greater severity, and for multiple times. And then black girls, it's about 6 times, right? Like, So I think for African-American children in general, the suspension piece pushes them into school to prison pipeline. But also, as a former school administrator and teacher, I don't necessarily think you can say eliminate suspensions either. Like, there needs to be alternatives to suspension. So I think that's a huge piece. I also think mentoring is a critical piece to help stem the school to prison pipeline. And again, we're doing a lot of that and pushing towards our goal of our starting goal of 500 with the support of the chancellor and the mayor, Mayor Bowser and Chancellor Henderson, to provide mentors at minimum to 500 boys in our school system in the city of Washington, D.C. So I think those are 2 critical pieces given folks. But also I think supporting teachers, right? Understanding that teachers are on the front line of discipline with young people, whether it's understanding the needs of the teachers for professional development, but also understanding that teachers are professionals. And so giving teachers the tools that they need to be successful, because none of us would be here if it weren't for a quality mentor and amazing teachers, period, the end, right? And so, I still, and it's funny because my teachers look at me now that are still around, and they're like, "You're involved in education. We've heard about this. Like, what the heck? You hated school." So I think that it's an amazing, opportunity to grow and develop when we support teachers. And then the last thing is that I think that part of it is empowering parents with information, because
getting them involved.
Yeah, and getting them involved. And so and I think that it's critical to do, but I also think that we also have to understand the complexity of being a parent, right? And so in many places where parents are facing challenging economic situations, they have to make a series of tough choices. Right. And so I always tell folks, people say, well, Robert, we need to have more parents coming to parent-teacher conferences. And I'm like, well, but is that really a sign of parental involvement or a issue of access?
Right.
Right. And so in Detroit, when people work in second and third shift, if I had to choose between putting food on the table and trusting the teacher that my kid is doing well, you're not calling me, my kid is doing well, why do I need to come to school?
Right.
So it's kind of it's a significant challenge, but I think family and parent engagement is critical. I know that in DCPS, our Chief of Family and Public Engagement, Josephine Robinson, does an amazing job connecting with families. We've been working with the Flamboyant Foundation to do work both in the school and home visits and all sorts of things. So I know that other school systems and communities are deeply involved in this work.
Yeah, and that's very important to get folks involved. But
Yeah.
one of the things I want to circle back to is you were talking about earlier is the connection that you made with someone who told you that you could be better. And that's so important because I know in my personal story, I had multiple individuals that told me that I could do and be better. But there was that one teacher, one principal, Miss Gwen Felders, who turned everything around for me because she was on me all the time. And I was like, would you just leave me alone? But I didn't realize at the time that she really cared. So how important is it for children and parents to be involved to help them to find a mentor within the school system, somebody that they're going to see on a regular basis other than just their teacher?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's important. And there was a quote I saw on Twitter. I don't know who put it out there, but it said that mentoring should be a part of the DNA of school systems. And I really believe that, right, as a solution to what we're facing in urban education. But I also think that a lot of this has been, when I think about quote unquote fixing urban schools, too much of the time is spent on the technical problem and not coming up with adaptive solutions, because it's an adaptive challenge too, right? Like it's not something where we can just test ourselves out of it, but it's also about understanding the human condition, right? And how do we build relationships between teachers, students, and parents? There's a great book by Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, The Essential Conversation. And in this book, she talks about the relationship and the partnership required between schools, teachers, and parents in the community. If you don't have that partnership running together and running in the same direction, it's really difficult to provide a quality education to young people, because everybody has to participate. And I always tell folks, when I wrote my dissertation, it was about the history of African-American teachers in the context of what happened in *54. And that's one of the things that I found that we lost when we desegregated the schools. And I'm not suggesting that we go back to segregation. What I am saying, during that point in time, there was a deep connection with the community, because that's all we had as Black folks at that time, pre-1954, was each other. And so I think as things have changed and evolved, we've tried to solve that issue with technical things, as opposed to understanding that it's an adaptive challenge, right? And so I think that's where we have probably dropped the ball just a bit, both as a community and as a field of urban education. So, but the work continues, and it's not something that changes overnight. It's not something that happens by us plugging in 500 mentors. Like there are multiple things that have to happen along the way for us to turn the corner in the field of urban education.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I actually wanted to circle back on as well, and we'll probably have to do this after the break, is there's a lot of kids that are very talented, that are in the classrooms, that are struggling or not doing well academically for a lot of different reasons. But some of these kids are very, very bright, but we're just not challenging them or reaching them in the right way.
Yeah, that's real talk. I mean, there are a lot of them. And, and that's the story I always tell, is that, this work that we do, especially with our Empowering Males of Color, if you talk about My Brother's Keeper, it's not about every male of color involved being bad, right? Like that is the master narrative propagated by too many in the media, right? That every Black man is going to prison. If you read the work of Ivory Tolson, he'll tell you like more Black men are in college than they're actually in prison. Like we need to stop with that type of nonsense as we read and talk to young people.
And we also need to make sure that we stop putting out these negative messages about this is going to be your future as a Black young man. Instead, saying, school to prison pipeline, we need to start thinking, how do we get students out of high school to college in the high school to college pipeline?
Absolutely.
And send those positive messages.
Absolutely.
So, folks, let's take a break. We'll be back in just a moment.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
This report brought to you by Dollar Tree. Get all your back-to-school basics for less at Dollar Tree, where everything's $1. Stock up on notebooks, binders, pencils, lunchbox snacks, locker accessories, and more. Dollar Tree, where everything's $1. A White House staffer is charged with assault and reckless endangerment. Barbetta Singletary is accused of firing a gunshot at her boyfriend, a Capitol police officer who was off duty. PG County police say no one was hurt Friday morning during a domestic argument at the woman's home in Upper Marlboro. Singletary is a special assistant to the president and House Legislative Affairs liaison. The White House says she's been placed on unpaid leave. The U.S. House chamber will reopen this morning.
Test results of a suspicious substance found in one of the walls came back negative for asbestos. Architects of the Capitol workers had been doing a renovation project when they made the discovery yesterday, and tourists were kept away from the chamber out of an abundance of caution. The House is not in session right now. I'm Tom Roberts.
Police in Maryland are investigating the deaths of 2 people and their possible link to a suspected arson fire in Frederick County. 27-year-old Kelly Short Hamilton of Brunswick and her estranged husband, 44-year-old Daniel Short, both had gunshot wounds when they were found inside a car in Washington County. It's believed the man was a resident of a small apartment building where there was a fire. No one was seriously hurt. The car with the bodies was found yesterday morning a few miles from the building. Arundel police say alcohol may have been involved in a fatal crash in Glen Burnie. They're investigating the accident early yesterday on Route 10 near the Beltway, where an SUV ran into some woods and hit a tree. The driver, 41-year-old Robin Ellis of Catonsville, was dead at the scene. Baltimore Ravens wide receiver Steve Smith has announced he'll retire following the upcoming NFL season. The 36-year-old spent most of his NFL career with the Carolina Panthers, where he holds team records. This report brought to you by the American Association for Cancer Research, finding cures together. Please support cancer research by donating today at www.aacrfoundation.org. I'm John Lewis. When you're looking for news for Black America, go to newsone.com.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back. We're having a conversation today with Dr. Robert W. Simmons III. He is what is your title over there?
Chief of Innovation and Research.
Chief of Innovation and Research at the D.C. Public Schools. And so, we're having a conversation about a lot of different things that impact a student's ability to be successful. And before we continue to move on, everybody can't relocate. So you had a great opportunity to relocate out of the school district that you're in to go to, and I hate to say it, but, a better school or better opportunity. So what do we do for those who can't relocate?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest dilemmas of our time in public education is urban schools, right? Because it's challenging to fix urban communities, but it's also challenging to fix urban schools. And it's not something that can happen overnight. It's not something that we can crunch a bunch of numbers to say we've been successful necessarily, because it's a long-term project, right? But yet we all know we want to fix it right now, right? Because our kids have to go through the school system, and we want to make it better for the young people who are in the school system at this current time. So, I think that it takes patience. It takes a level of commitment, takes a level of persistence, and kind of staying the course. And I think that's the challenge, because when I was teaching, and it's the same trend you'll see in schools now, where you'll do something for a minute and then all of a sudden there's something new, innovative. And yeah, it might be a good idea, but we didn't figure out if the first thing didn't work. And if it didn't work, what went wrong? Things like that. And it's just a byproduct of our culture and our society. We want to fix things right now because we seek instant gratification. But it's almost like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if you don't fix it right now, you're going to lose a generation of young people, and we could have a lost generation. And that's the complexity of it. And it requires a nuanced response. I think that oftentimes we're overly simplistic in solutions, and then therefore that also means we were probably overly simplistic in understanding the problems.
Yeah, and actually, when you were talking just now, it just actually reminded me of the conversation that we were having prior to the break. We were talking about there's a lot more black men that have degrees than are in jail. And one of the things that is interesting to me is because I actually go into the Arlington County Detention Facility and I teach inmates about business, life, and soft skills. And it's amazing how intelligent these guys are. And so even from my perspective going in there, I didn't necessarily know what to think. But now I have this group of guys that are coming in. And the thing that's amazing to me now is that they want knowledge. They want information. They want to learn. They want to be better. And they actually bring other folks into the class when they realize that they have an opportunity to be better.
Yeah, and I've spent time going into prison facilities since I was a first-year teacher, working with juveniles, working with adults. And one of the things I realize is the humanity that we all have, but how your humanity can be broken down to its core when you're incarcerated, because you're stripped of everything, right? You're stripped of opportunity. A lot of prisons don't have degree programs anymore. And so it's just like bare bones. I mean, the United States has the largest prison population based on our population size in the world.
Right.
And so like we can't prison our way out of this, right? And so, and it's complicated because some people do need to go to prison. But at the same time, when you get caught carrying 2 marijuana leaves, you shouldn't get 10 years.
Right.
Right. It's just crazy. Like there are other things that we can do for folks. And what happens is once you put somebody in prison, very few of them are going to come out reformed,
right,
and better people, because you go into prison with other criminals and you're in there for 2 years, and you're in there with somebody who has a life sentence. You're going to learn how to be a better criminal.
Right.
And you're much more likely to be reintroduced into the prison industrial complex. And that's just problematic in and of itself.
Yeah. And if we're just having these guys just sitting around all day and not giving them quality educational activities to do, what else do we expect?
Yeah. Yeah. And, and again, I think that, it's a challenge, right? Like, because it's a burden on the taxpayers. And, and I used to always, when people would say that, I'm like, what? And when you start to pull back the layers of running a prison, like, it's expensive, But I always say to folks, if it's so expensive, it costs less to educate young people than it does to house them in a prison. So why do we spend more in the prison industrial complex than we do in education? That's just silly to me, right? So if you want to fix one thing, and you don't want the other folks in there, but I'm a conspiracy theorist, and we have all the for-profit prisons, so like
that's another issue.
That's a whole other issue in and of itself. You know what I mean? Like, who benefits from so many people of color being sent to prison? But that's a whole other show.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that I was thinking about is we need to put a lot more energy and effort in trying to reach these students when they're in junior high, when they're in high school, before they start to turn and go in a totally different direction. Because one of the things that I know is that when I was in the classroom, I was bored, and there was a one-style-fits-all approach to teaching, which was very passive. I'm just going to give you information, you take notes, and then I'm going to test you on it. Well, that doesn't fit my learning style. My learning style is actually an active learning style, so I need to be engaged through question and answers.
And, and I think that the challenge is that people in K-12 know that. But I found when I was a university professor and a researcher that more people in higher ed were resistant to instructional change. So what happens is that I found a lot of very bright high school students show up as a freshman and a first-year student, and, they have a biology class where in previous iterations of biology in high school, they had hands-on labs and so on and so forth that was embedded in the context of instruction. Whereas you get to a lot of universities and the professor stands up there and just dumps all this knowledge in a 45-minute, 50-minute lecture, and then they wonder why students don't pass and students drop out. And I'm like, well, it's a simple business proposition. If you want to fix the model, think about the bottom line. If you're losing students and you're not retaining a significant number of students at a university, it's going to cost you money because you've already put money into recruiting them, right? So you're not going to get a return on your investment. But universities and stuff like that that's a whole other conversation about changing instruction, because I also think that universities are let off the hook, right? Like K-12, we're held accountable for whether kids graduate and so on and so forth, and we're forced to change through policy and so on and so forth. But universities just do whatever they want, and there's no push for so many faculty to change the way they do instruction.
Right.
And that's just a problem in and of itself that a lot of people don't want to take on. Those who do get banished to the far never reaches of higher education.
Well, I want to digress from our conversation for just a moment, because that's a very significant point, because I teach college students. And one of the things that I tell my students because I teach business classes on the first day of the class is that this is an interesting value proposition, because where else in life do you pay somebody to grade you?
Right.
And you have to understand that this is a business. You're a customer. And if you're not liking the way that I'm teaching, if my teaching style doesn't work for you, you have the right to have a conversation with me and say, this doesn't work for me. And let's figure out a way that works. But the other thing that I am starting to do more of is the first and foremost, I try to make a personal connection with my students. Being able to call on students by name is very important. But also, I think we need to get away from just having heavy homework assignments and over testing individuals, because testing isn't something that happens in the real world. What I want to have are students that are comfortable interacting with their classmates,
Sure.
being able to convey their knowledge and in a manner that everybody can understand and stand on their own.
Yeah, and a critical part of it is that just like there's teacher preparation for learning how to teach in K-12, higher education doesn't have that. Right. And so friends of mine are always like, oh, you can't say that. And I'm always like, well, just because you have a PhD in biology doesn't mean you can teach biology. That just means you know a lot about biology.
Exactly.
Right. And it's not to suggest that someone with a PhD in biology shouldn't teach at X, Y, and Z university. It does mean that the university, in my opinion, ethically owes it to the students to provide that person with training so that they know how to teach. Because all they're going to do is replicate the poor teaching they received when they were a graduate student, the plug and chug lecture style.
Right.
But that's not leading to a positive outcome for so many first generation students and a lot of us students of color. So it's problematic, and no one wants to problematize it because of issues around tenure and promotion at the university.
Well, and that's a totally different issue.
Yeah, that's another issue, right?
But what you're saying, and just to sort of sum it all up, is that we've got to have teachers, whether it's at the high school level or at the college level, that are passionate about their work, that care about the students, and are trying to make the experience most valuable for the students, and not necessarily just checking boxes just to push them along.
Absolutely. Yep.
So while we're talking about teaching, you were a former teacher.
Yep,
so
I was.
Why did you become a teacher?
I just saw that as the thing that I enjoyed the most. My senior year in high school, we had to do a service project every Wednesday, and mine was at a school, at a Catholic school in Detroit. And I loved it. Like, I fell in love with education, right? And so I want to differentiate between teaching and education, because for me, teaching is open a book to page 35, take the test, close a book, sit down, shut up, right? Education is opening young folks' minds to the larger possibilities in the world, right? Through hands-on things, through like in DCPS, we have a program called DC Meets Washington that's run by one of my colleagues, Emily Durso, and her team. And it's amazing because it gets young folks out of their community and they actually do education. And, and I think that's critical. And so for me, when I started to realize that I had the ability to do that, I did follow the curriculum most of the time, some of the time, but I also recognized there were limitations in the structure of the curriculum and that I needed to be able to think outside the box and use my professional judgment to make decisions. And my students did well. They scored well on the test, but they also were critical thinkers and critical intellectuals about the world.
Right. And we need to be able to teach our students to think beyond the obvious, think outside of the box, so that they don't just take information that's given to them and say, oh, this is what it is. No, this is what was given to you. Yeah. Now think about it and make sure that it makes sense.
And that's so important. That's so important. And I think that's, for me, what I'm most proud of the Black Lives Matter movement, is that it's a group of young people leading this work using critical thinking skills. Like, they understand the power of Twitter. They understand now about how do you organize and have demands and policy demands, like what do we want as a result of this Black Lives Matter campaign? And I think for me, that's a classic example of young people really understanding how to think creatively to solve a critical problem.
Right. And before we go to the break, so you taught for many years, you received nominations for your teaching, so you were well respected in your field as an administrator, as an educator. So why did you give that up? So why did you give up teaching to become an administrator?
Yeah, it was an accident, where I was asked to serve basically as an assistant principal in elementary school by someone who saw the mentoring program that I built in Minnesota for Black boys and felt like, you can take these skills and translate them into helping to work with young people as an administrator. And so off I went to that part of my journey.
All right. Well, there's a lot of different ways that we can teach and help others to grow.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll continue this conversation right after the break.
1450 WOL.
Good morning. This WOL Traffic Update is brought to you by the Foundation for a Better Life. Southbound 295, still pretty slow from Benning Road to East Capitol Street. On the inner loop, southbound at Ritchie Marlboro Road, left lane is closed with debris in the roadway, Minnesota Avenue at Clay Place, just south of Benning Road. The accident all cleared up. Everything there is open now. Winston Churchill's words stirred his country in the face of defeat. Today they inspire us to reach for our own victories. Commitment, pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com. Now your WOL weather forecast brought to you by Food Lion. For today, you could see some thunderstorms this afternoon, a high near 87. Partly cloudy overnight down to 68. Tomorrow, mostly sunny day. Could see a couple clouds here and there, a high near 85. Visit your local Food Lion for MVP hot sales like seedless green grapes, $1.59 a pound, and select varieties of Lance crackers. Buy one, get one free, limit 2. Life's better with the Lion, Food Lion. Steve Hirschhorn for News Talk 1450 WOL AM, where information is power.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. Simons from the DC Public Schools, and I can't believe we're already in the last segment here, but here we go. So before we get to the end of the segment, I actually don't like to do this at the end. So tell us about some of the things that you've got coming up, because in a few moments you'll have an opportunity to tell us about your work at DC Public Schools. Mm-hmm. But what are some projects that you have that you're working on?
Our biggest project is our mentoring program, where we're seeking to provide mentors to a significant number of our students in DCPS. We're looking for 500 plus mentors. We're on track to hit that number. We are looking for folks to kind of follow our work on Twitter at EMOC_DC.
Hold on. Let's give that a little bit slower to make sure folks get that.
Our Twitter handle is at EMOC_DC. You can find out more information about our mentoring, and you can sign up to be a mentor. There's a 2-step process by going to emocdc.org, emocdc.org. And please sign up. Our young people need mentors. We are working hard with a variety of partners, including Higher Achievement, Reading Partners, Alliance of Concerned Men, Concerned Black Men. I mean, we have them all. For the Love of Children, Reach. I apologize to any of our partners that don't hear their names mentioned. Mentor. There's just a variety. United Way. So we've worked with Monumental Entertainment to start building out a public service announcement with the Wizards. Mm-hmm. The Mystics have allowed us to recruit mentors at games. So there are a variety. We have schools that we're working with. And again, people can sign up to be a mentor at emocdc.org.
And what if I'm interested in being a mentor, but I don't have 40 hours a week? Maybe I only have like 2 or 3.
So that's fine. We want folks who can dedicate an hour at minimum a week. If you can dedicate more, great. And they say that a quality mentor relationship is a minimum of 4 hours. And so we would love to have folks dedicate 2 to 3 hours a week with our students. But if you can't, then there are other ways that you can get involved with our Empowering Males of Color initiative in the District of Columbia Public Schools.
All right. So we've been on for almost a full hour now, and we haven't had an opportunity to talk about your work as the Chief of Innovation and Research at DCPS. So tell us a little bit about that.
So our primary work at this point, there are 2 pieces. There's the Empowering Males of Color initiative, which was launched by Mayor Bowser and Chancellor Henderson and myself. We had some representatives from a variety of places speak to this work. That was launched in January. Mm-hmm. And so that is the primary piece of our office at the moment that we're taking on. We also have some research pieces where we've just applied for 2 grants for well over $1 million with through IES, and one is with Bank Street College to build out our early childhood work. Focusing on boys of color, and we had great success with the 3-school pilot with a grant that we have for that. Mm-hmm. We're also doing a program development and a research grant with Loyola University, Maryland, a former colleague of mine, Vanessa Dodo-Sariki, Adrian Dixon, who's at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I think there's a couple of folks at Murray State. Mm-hmm. So it's a multi-university collaboration with DCPS, and that is really looking at the role of culturally relevant pedagogy in the field of science education. And so that is another big chunk of our work. But we also work collaboratively across the district with different offices. We work with the Office of Human Capital to increase the number of African American and Latino men who apply to be teachers, and we've witnessed, I believe, a 47% increase in the number of teachers of color in the district who have applied. Mm-hmm. And we've witnessed a growth in the number of schools that are building their own mentoring programs, for instance. Mm-hmm. We had a huge project where we took 10 boys of color from D.C. and sent them to Croatia with Step Africa. Shout out to Step Africa. Much love. And it changed the lives of so many of the students. And one of my staff, Billy Kearney, took that on, and, much love and respect for him because he was one of the chaperones. And so, you go out of much less leave D.C., but going out of the country with a bunch of teenagers, God bless you. But
exactly.
And so the young people came back, and their Twitter handle is known as Crowboy, CROBOYZ, I believe. And Chancellor Henderson went to see their work. So we've had some amazing successes to date. But as I always tell people, I believe this struggle is righteous, and I believe that the work has to continue so that we can provide a better life outcome for so many of the young people in the city of Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. And then, so why did you accept this role in the first place?
Much of my work had been in urban education as a researcher. I believe in the vision of Chancellor Henderson for empowering males of color. Mayor Bowser, at that time, it was Mayor Gray who was on board. Mayor Bowser has continued to support it, but Mayor Bowser drove the initiative. And the fact that you have the chancellor and the mayor kind of standing arm in arm with you, like, you can't find better partners to support the work. And, and I just felt like this was the perfect intersection between my life as a researcher and my life in K-12, where I now had the ability to impact change in a very productive way.
Okay. And so what have you learned in this position?
I've learned that it's complicated, not something I didn't already know, but it's difficult, right? Like doing the work to improve the lives of young people, whether we're talking about the opportunity gap, whatever we're talking about, whether we're talking about black boys, suspensions of black girls, whatever we're talking about in urban education, it is hard, right? And it takes time, and there's no quick fix to it all. And so those are things I already knew, but like they've been reinforced being in this job and the complexity of doing it in a community.
And I know that some folks out there will say that there's inequalities related to the delivery of educational services, especially in predominantly minority communities. So what types of things are representative of these inequalities that exist, and how can they be changed?
Yeah, so they can be changed. For instance, in DCPS, we have challenged the access that young people have to AP courses, right? And so we are working to level the playing field with AP courses in the city of Washington, D.C., in the public sector. And so over the next couple of years, we're going to work to increase to 6 to 8 to 10, so on and so on and so forth, as a minimum, right, where that is the bar. Because, the reality of it is, and if we're honest, there are schools in the city, even as DC public schools, where young people have a different level of access to types of courses, right? And so part of it is that equity, achieving educational equity, is very different than equality, right? And so people often say, well, I want equality, but for me, I want equity and fairness, right? And so you may have on a pair of shoes, I may not have any shoes, right? Like that's a whole other conversation, right? And so, we're pushing forward with that. We're pushing forward with SAT, ACT prep through collaborations with Kaplan and the College Board and Khan Academy. So there are a variety of things that people are doing. We're also working through some cornerstone assignments through our Office of Teaching and Learning. And so we're really pushing hard to provide quality access to our young people.
And then just shifting a little bit, let's talk about graduation rates in D.C. So what's the percentage of students graduating in D.C.?
I'm not clear. I'm not sure off the top of my head because we haven't received the most recent data, because we just graduated a group of students for our rainbow graduation. Those are young people who graduate in the summer. And so that counts towards our graduation rate. So we're still waiting to get that data compiled. But I believe you're going to see a growth in graduation rates in the District of Columbia Public Schools. I'm not sure how much, but in my estimation, when I look at the graduations that I've attended, it's amazing to see the excitement of young folks when they walk across that stage. And it's a sense of accomplishment for so many. And so many of them were told they would never graduate from high school. And some of them do. Many of them do. For those that continue to struggle, like, we have to stand with them and stand by them to support them through high school graduation.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to find out a little bit more about what's actually going on to improve the graduation rates.
I can speak to that. So we've built and constructed ninth grade academies. It's a world-class effort in DC public schools. We've been able to see a higher rate of retention for ninth graders who are in our ninth grade academy programs. We've seen an increase in them being on track to graduation, because part of it is early intervention. When we think about high school graduation, if we wait till senior year to try to fix it, it's too late. Right? And some would argue that it's too late to focus on it in ninth grade, right? Which is another conversation. But let's just go with the idea of ninth grade. When kids leave ninth grade, they need to have enough credits to be on track to graduate in 4 years. Like, that's the marker of figuring out what do we need to do.
Right.
If we wait until 10th grade, 11th grade, I mean, if you're off by 8 credits, you're not going to graduate in 4 years, period, the end. So, like, we have to figure it out, and I believe that we're taking a stab at trying to figure it out but I also don't think it's unique to DC public schools. I mean, I think there are schools all over the country in urban communities trying to figure this out and fighting every day with families, with communities to build a collaboration, a cohesive effort to improve the outcomes for young folks in urban schools.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the fact that there's folks like you that are out there working, that are passionate, clearly passionate about the work that you're doing, because we need more folks that are the foot soldiers that are trying to make a difference every day and not just doing the talk. Because there's a lot of folks that are out here that are doing talk and saying what's wrong, but they're not willing to go out there and get their hands dirty.
And I will say, that always drives me nuts when people always offer a critique, but they offer no solution. When I say, well, how would you do it differently? Well, I'm just saying what you're doing is wrong. Okay, well, then tell me what to do. And they just kind of look dumbfounded when you ask them. And it's we're in a solutions-oriented business in public education.
Right.
We can't problematize everything. You have to have a solution. You don't like the lunch food? Okay, well, you want filet mignon? Well, we need filet mignon money. Where are we going to get it from?
Right.
That's the solution. Okay,
right.
You want better food? It costs extra money to do X, Y, and Z. So.
And in the closing moments of the show, so last year, DC opened the Re-Engagement Center. Can you tell us quickly about that?
So I'm not going to speak to the Re-Engagement Center because that's not housed in my lane. And so I don't want to misspeak about what they do. I mean, what I do know about it is that they're working hard every day in the city of Washington, D.C. to reconnect with young folks who've been detached from the teaching and learning process. All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate having you on the show today. Definitely go out to his website at Robert W. Simmons III. So that's robertwsimmons3.com, because he has a lot of great information. He has a great story. He's an inspirational role model and a motivational speaker as well. So if you want to get in touch with him for that. So, folks, I hope that you enjoyed today's show. On next week's show, my guest will be Ryan Ricecamp of Mission Launch, who is an entrepreneur who happens to be a returning citizen after spending 3 years in federal custody. Now he's part of a team that's proving that individuals formerly incarcerated still have value and should be given a chance to become productive members of society. Remember, your candle is fuel from within, so don't let anyone reduce or block the fuel to maximize its brightness. Enjoy the rest of your week. Until next time, my friends, have a good one.
News Talk 1450 WOL AM, where information is power.